Chapter 5 Until 1982. The 2.5 years following my encounter with the Holy Spirit were the most dynamic of my life. I was immersed in the joy of walking with God for the first time, and it was glorious. I began reading the Bible the very next day, and, to my own surprise, I finished the entire book from cover to cover within a month. King David was indeed right when he said, "How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth." I could literally taste the sweetness in my mouth as I read the scriptures. At the same time, my mind overflowed with questions, and I found myself running to the senior pastor constantly. I still remember the look on his face when I approached him with my second question after reading Genesis 4. I asked, "Cain says, 'Whoever finds me will kill me.' But who could he possibly mean? There were only four people: Adam, Eve, Cain, and the late Abel. Surely he didn't mean his parents." The pastor looked at me deeply for a long moment, as if he could already see that I wouldn't be content with an average Christian life. Prayer became another source of immense joy. God seemed to answer every prayer of mine almost instantly during those early days. I understand now that it's because, spiritually, I was an infant who needed extra care to grow strong. But at the time, it was simply thrilling. It felt as though I was his favorite. I knew it was not the case since I learned that much from the church, but that's how I felt. God also demonstrated his love towards me in many different ways. He spoke in my heart in his small voice, and he sent me love letters in my dreams. After a lifetime of discrimination and being treated as a burden by my family, I was finally completely soaked in the feeling of being unconditionally loved for the first time in my life. Of course, the first attack from the enemy followed soon after. I came across a book shortly after my mind boggling encounter with God. In that book, the author argued that God is in fact some kind of an alien. It was written with a cold, logical precision that threw me into immediate confusion. An alien? I wondered. Was my experience just some telepathic signal from a visitor? The thought tortured me until I nearly lost my joy. But after weeks of inner wandering, God helped me find my footing again. I knew what I had experienced was real, and that meant the Holy Spirit was real, no matter what anyone else wrote. Then, after a year or so from receiving the Holy Spirit, one of the most important events in my life happened to me. I was given the chance to have a cutting edge surgery on my leg. At the time, there was only one surgical team in South Korea performing this procedure for polio survivors, led by a doctor who had recently returned from America. There were thousands of people like me, but the team could only take a few. The selection process was strict. The lead doctor believed the patient's attitude was as important as the surgery itself. They wanted positive, strong willed people who would do whatever it took to recover. No bitter minded or twisted person would they take. This was because the surgery was brutal. They would break the incorrectly connected bones and joints to reset them, then divide living nerves and muscles to substitute for the dead ones so that the patient could have all the necessary nerves and muscles, though they would be weaker compared to people with no polio. This, however, meant that immediately after surgery, the patient would be weaker than before because the muscles and nerves he or she mainly used before, which had 100% of power previously, would only have 50% of what they had after the surgery. They'd have to learn to walk all over again using new muscle groups, and this process would be a long and hard one, they said. Without a strong spirit, a patient would likely give up and end up worse off, they said. If, however, the person overcomes this process and strengthens the divided muscles and nerves until they become like before, until each divided one becomes as big and powerful as the one before they were divided, then the person would be able to not only walk again, but walk much better or even run just like other people with no polio. There was no way I could have been picked if it was me before I received the Holy Spirit. Just as you read, I was a perfect example of a bitter minded and twisted person. The Holy Spirit, however, changed me dramatically, and I was full of confidence, completely a positive person when I had the interview with the team. Being a Christian himself as well, the lead doctor was impressed how much I was full of the Holy Spirit and how greatly that changed my mind, as they said later. They accepted me without hesitation. It was all thanks to God indeed. My mother and I moved to the city where the team was based to get the surgery and stayed there for the next few months after the surgery. My mother later said she was terrified watching me go into the operating room. She could see all the tools that were going to be used in the surgery and felt she was looking into a carpenter's kit: a hammer, a chisel, and even an axe. This one, she said, was gold plated. The surgery was a success. Before the operation, my right foot had begun to turn upside down, with the sole facing upward. They broke my ankle and reset the bones. Then they divided the muscles and nerves of the back of my leg, brought half of them to the front of my leg, connected them, substituting my dead muscles and nerves of the front. They also divided the tendons of my big toe and the last one, which were the only alive ones among five tendons, and connected half of them to my second and fourth toes so that I could eventually pull four of five toes. There were no words to describe the pain I woke up to. Literally, the pain was in my bones, since that's what they corrected. Standard painkillers were of no use at all, and they had to give me morphine to ease the pain. Even then, the agony only receded slightly. Yet, through the power of the Holy Spirit in me, I endured. It was also one of the few peaceful times I had with my mother, away from the constant threat of my father's violence. After a few months of staying in the hospital, we came back to our house. From then on, my walking practice and exercise started. What the doctors had said was true. I couldn't move my leg as much as I did before at first. Before, I couldn't kick, but there was no problem in pulling back my leg and moving my ankle, since at least one or two tendons and nerves were 100% in function. Now, however, I couldn't either kick or pull back in full strength, nor could I move my ankle as I could before. Walking was harder than it had ever been. I developed a grueling daily routine. I would pack a lunchbox and spend hours every day climbing the mountain in my town. At home, I spent hours sitting and standing, kicking back and forth, trying to wake up those divided muscles. I should have had a professional physiotherapist, but once again, my father denied it. He considered it just a waste of money, since you could do all those exercises by yourself at home. Looking back, now I see how foolish the thought was, but that was my reality. Hence, I had to do whatever I could just by myself. The process was truly long and painful. I climbed the mountain for hours every day and exercised hours every day, yet the progress was invisible. People would not even notice that I was trying to move my leg and ankle while I was trying until my whole body was soaked with sweat. After a year of that, I got exhausted since I couldn't see the result of my effort. I have always been a bit impatient, and I was reaching my limit. Tired of trying something seemingly impossible, I turned to God once again. I was confident that God would heal my leg completely if I prayed hard enough. After all, He came to me and gave His Spirit when I didn't even believe in His existence that much. Then He proved His love by answering almost all my prayers, much smaller and far less important ones, instantly until now. So why wouldn't He answer this prayer of mine, especially when it is the most important prayer of mine? It would be the best way for me to glorify Him as well. What can be more powerful to testify about God and His endless power and love to the people around me, including my family, than showing a miracle of me leaping and dancing in front of their eyes? Right on that day, I went to a famous prayer house in my city and started my fasting prayer. It probably shouldn't be called fasting, since I didn't even drink water for the first 15 days. It was a miracle that I survived at all, but I didn't realize it at the time. That much I was determined. I prayed day and night, but a strange thing happened. Every time I opened my mouth to pray for my leg, I found myself praying for my family's construction project instead. At that time, my parents gathered money and bought a house. They were in the process of expanding that house into a 4-story building. However, there were many troubles in the process. One of the neighbors submitted a complaint on purpose to stop the construction because they knew our building would become the best spot in the area once it was built, and that would work against their building. There was another who kept reporting us, saying we violated the construction code while we didn't. The construction was constantly put on hold by the local government, while we had to finish the construction within a very narrow window of time because of the relevant regulations. Otherwise, we might lose a lot of money and end up without completing the construction. There was also an internal argument over the title of the building. My mother insisted it should be under her name as her family provided the money. Plus, she knew my father was not talented in saving money. He earned money well, but he used to spend more than he earned. Hence, she was adamant that the building should be under her name solely. My father, of course, didn't like it. It was not the practice to have a real estate under a woman's name in Korea traditionally. Because of all this, the construction quickly became the new and hottest theme that caused fighting between my father and mother every day. And this, the construction, was the main thing that I found myself praying for every time I opened my mouth. I didn't know why and I didn't like it, but it was not me who was praying inside of me. For some reason unknown to me yet, the Holy Spirit pressed me to pray for the house over and over again. It was also during this time that I was first exposed to the gift of tongues. Instantly, I became curious and desired it. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I simply thought I should have that as well, since all other people were praying in that unknown language. From then on, asking for the gift of tongues became another prayer of mine. And, to my surprise, this one was granted almost instantly and in somewhat a memorable way. One of the ministers came to me and laid her hand on me at the end of the service. She started praying for me to be given the gift of tongues and told me to open my mouth and start making sound or mimicking her tongues even, saying God was saying that He already gave me the gift of tongues. I refused. I clamped my mouth shut like a clam. I believed that if it was from God, He would force my mouth open with a power I couldn't resist. The minister prayed until she was soaked in sweat, eventually shaking her head at my stubbornness. Yet she did not give up. Then, suddenly, shining golden letters appeared behind my closed eyelids. La Kambla Show. That's what it read. I still don't know what it means, but it didn't matter. God whispered, "Read it." I could not dare to resist anymore. I opened my mouth, and the moment I spoke those letters, the prayer poured out of me. It was a gift.